be presented by Carolina Nasser and Lais Lopes. They are both from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. They are doing their PhD in law. You may start your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Lais Lopes.
And I'm Carolina Nasser.
We are both PhD students at law school of Federal University of Minas Gerais. My main interest is actually gender and sexuality studies, and Carolina has been developing some studies in the legal status of animals and also drug abuse. What exactly unites our works with the workshop object and our communication is the studies of personhood, or the legal status of person in law. So
I believe the first thing we need to clarify is that our paper presented here aims to structure a debate over philosophy of mind in social applied sciences, such as law, for example. Therefore, we aim to address basic and fundamental debates over the extended mind theory and also its discussions. We naturally come from the law field, social applied sciences, so our method here might be slightly different from the other colleagues who has also presented here the works, but let's start.
Well, law is a little bit, a lot resistant to interdisciplinary studies, so we are insisting upon doing a critical review of some of legal institutions from the point of view of the extended mind theory.
We aim to start this presentation with the case of prison systems, especially Brazilian prison system. We now have a total of 730,000 imprisoned persons, approximately. We own the sad position of the third largest prison population in the world. So these high rates, they might reflect the traditional way of punishment system that we have here in Brazil, according to which responsibility is solely individual and autonomy is a natural condition. We're going to develop these discussions through our presentation, but we now aim to ask, which are then the basis of punishing someone? What we observe is that not only concepts like decision-making, but notions of autonomy are analyzed in a traditional and not very correct way in legal system. A lot of external elements, they build our cognitive capacities, but we are also highly dependent on those elements. In this sense, we can assume that we do have a hybrid cognition. An agency, for example, engages artifacts, environmental information, and also the active participation of other social agents. So if external stimuli, they play a fundamental role on mental events, then it follows that the conceptual basis of current legal institutions, such as, for example, autonomy and responsibility, is therefore obsolete in law. So decision-making processes are environmental related. We can have some examples of those relationships in socialization, technology use, educational forms, language. So the main question we address here is, why does law still reinforce such static ideas of responsibility and autonomy? We guess that this is the pinnacle of supporting the Cartesian transcendental notion of what does it mean to actually be a person, and also why should the personhood and how should it be considered?
Well, our presentation will be structured in the following goals. The first one is to raise discussions about brain-machine interfaces and their impacts on the legal concept of biointegrity. to argue for the notion of socially standard cognition, in as much as the extended mind theory brings further legal and ethical challenges still to be tackled, and to supersede current assumptions of personhood, responsibility, and autonomy underlying our legal theory and practice.
What we basically aim to address is that these two ways of analyzing, understanding cognition and understanding hybrid cognition processes, they shock the notions that legal framework deals with the traditional concept of personhood.
So we've decided to start by the most evident example of the Cartesian and also the traditional conception of person currently present in our legal system. Brazilian civil code was originally conceived during the military dictatorship government. By that time, we had several civil rights restrictions. It was approved our civil code with tiny changes only in 2002, and it is our basic civil rights bills. We have this specific article that reflects the centrality of the essentialization of bodies in law. It is extremely outdated actually, and it claims that except for medical reasons, like organ donation, for example, it is forbidden the act of disposal of one's own body, especially when it imports permanent diminution of physical integrity or when it's contrary to the common decency. A very controversial concept. And also I had the chance during my master's dissertation to study legal decisions, judicial decisions on the transgender rights. So it was very evident the conception of body as immutable, something that should not be that should be preserved against any kind of unnatural and very moralist changes. So this is one of the decisions I wanted to bring for us to discussion. There is no need for written laws to define what springs from nature. The synthesis of Napoleon can be transferred to this case thus. The law does not need to define the phenomena of nature as the biological gender of beings. The redefinition of nature, which is general, is not good, since nature tends to take revenge in organized societies is possible when the legislation forewarn against its harms and pay special attention to the collective interests, especially of great majority of good faith that will be affected by the decision of doing some kind of transgender surgery, for example.
What we wanted to address up to here is that the concept that we develop in philosophy of mind and other fields of philosophy especially are not quite as well discussed in the legal field. We can clearly observe some absurd ideas, some weird notions of natural and some weird notions of body, and how the philosophy of mind debate is not at all discussed in law. And that is why we are going to take a step back and discuss basic and elementary items. So, is it possible to sustain empirically such an outdated notion of persons, of bodies, of minds, and especially how those concepts do affect, when changed, the notions of autonomy and responsibility? In other words, we observe that law does not follow the scientific knowledge. Lawyers, judges, and prosecutors' way to describe the phenomena are actually outdated and based on the notion that physical substance is completely disentangled from the material processes. Yet, we can see that these cognitive immaterial apparatus persist through time, not being directly affected by materiality and social processes. That's what we could observe through the analysis of the process Lais just shown us about the transgender people. So it has been shown, however, that through the development of contemporary cognitive sciences, that minds and bodies are actually material and plastic processes. And they both demand a two-way interaction between biology and environmental conditions for them effectively to be. Thus, when we talk about bodies and minds, we are actually talking about constructs, not about given and innate entities. So what are actually the boundaries of the body? That's the question we ask ourselves, but law does not specifically ask itself this question. So thus, ontologically, it has been suggested by now that the relation between minds and bodies, they actually indicate that mental and bodily events are material. And epistemologically, it has been suggested that it's impossible to actually understand the character of minds and bodies by looking solely at them. Cognition is not therefore only embedded, but it's also extended. So we come to the idea of the extended mind, and we are not going to talk a lot about it. We've already discussed it a little bit here in our workshop, but we want to stress 2 points that are basically important for our analysis in law, which are brain plasticity, or how does our brain actually embraces the environment besides us, how does...
Highly adaptive.
Yeah, it is also adaptive, and how the parity principle works. So if we can consider a cognitive function that is working inside our brain, we need to necessarily consider these outside functions as well, if they are also impaired.
Oh my God. We brought the classical example of extended mind, the case of Otto and Inga. They are married for a long time, and they arranged a visit to the museum by the afternoon, and Otto has Alzheimer, and Inga recurs to her memory to remember that she's going to the museum, and where is the museum, the street, the exact address of the museum. Otto has some committed some problems on the memory due to the Alzheimer, so he uses his notebooks to get all the information needed to go to the museum, and by the principle of the parity, the mental event of consulting the notebook is part of the mind, the mental process of Otto.
So going beyond the embodied itself, we can see that it's not just external representations that should be counted as part of the mind, on the basis that they are an integral part of cognition. As well as external representations, we use external tools to enhance our thought. For example, counting on numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a form of extended cognition. These tools for thinking, they are almost as old as human beings. Indeed, perhaps only we became truly human when we actually developed them. It's the most basic, for example, and obvious of those tools is speech, what we are actually doing here. Coming to a conclusion of this debate by now, we can see 2 possible consequences of what we talked by now. One of them is what we called a weak debate, a debate about the contours of the body and how it affects the notion of physical integrity and bodily assault in law. And the second one is the strong debate. This is the core debate of the production of subjects and also the character of freedom. So the weak debate, it's actually not entirely new. But however, Brazilian law remains anachronic in dealing with contemporary issues concerning the human body. We can also raise some examples such as how to deal with prison systems and how prison affects the body of the people, but also BIID, body integrity identity disorder, and transgender demands on body modification and also morphological freedom. There is an issue in legal systems, especially in the Western world, that when someone is assaulted physically, it's a physical assault. What the extended mind theory points to the law is that if our extended cognition apparatus is affected by someone, should it be considered also as a bodily assault, for example? And there's also the strong debate.
Well, subjective is composed by the environment. It is not only shaped by it, it does not exist without it and the elements of reality. Besides that, what we aim to highlight is that it is necessary for social applied sciences to rethink what we understand when we talk about the notion of freedom. If we assume the idea of shared selves, it emerges a new possibility for law. Law must necessarily take it into account when making normative judgments on behaviors. Freedom should be understood in this sense as a normative criteria to evaluate and enhance context of decision making in order to understand and criticize those processes.
So, returning to the initial case we proposed, is it still ethical to normatively impose individual punishment, or can we consider that social reorganization is a more plausible way of dealing with rights and legal discussions? That's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So let's start with the discussion. David.
Thank you. That's fascinating. You mentioned the socially extended mind, and I'm curious about how exactly you see that as coming into the legal system. You mentioned at one point that attacks on maybe some part of your extended cognition apparatus could be like a form of assault on the person, like maybe, I suppose, taking my phone away could be a form of assault. How does that enter with socially extended cognition when other people are constituting parts of your mind?
Thank you for the question. It's a debate that legal institutions does not take into considerations at all. But what we want to address here is that if our cognitions extend, we do not have actually arguments against the fact that these are part of our bodies, and also if our brain has such a plasticity, we can also extend our body image to other things. And if the legal debate does consider that our body is harmed when someone takes away a part of it, we should necessarily consider that, for a logical argument, that our body is also embedded into that thing, that apparatus, that technological apparatus, for example. So the concept of assault should be extended as well to deal with material substances outside the human body. But the notion of socially extended mind is, for law, it's a tricky question because legal systems operate with 1 or 0. They do not. They are actually binary things. There's men and there's women. They cannot comprehend such a plastic category as the socially extended mind. What I suggest is that the legal system should understand responsibility as socially shared. So we need to rethink the way we deal with, for example, punishment, and also the way we deal with personhood as well. I believe it's clarified, right?
Thanks. That's helpful. Here's maybe a specific question about the socially extended mind here, which is normally we think we have, I guess, moral and legal rights over our bodies and over our minds. But now just say the mind gets socially extended so that other people become somehow a part of my mind. Does that then give me some legal and moral rights over other people?
Yeah, I understand. I believe that to answer that question, we need to rethink law. Law is not capable of dealing with the completely new way of thinking about the socially extended mind. But I believe that we need to reorganize how we think about autonomy. So if I am making one decision, there's a bunch of other people making this decision with me, because I was socially raised in a way, because I was socially educated in a way, and I was born in, for example, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. But legal system cannot deal with that at all. We need a new way of thinking about law itself.
I guess we are here recognizing that we don't have
that
the,
we are
the
incapable
tools
of doing
in
that.
law to deal with the new advances of neuroscience.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I would like to stay on the claim that we should consider our phones part of our body legally, because I really like the idea of an extended mind and the implications it has, by, for example, in the education. So I really like the fact that you can evaluate a student not just by his memory, but his cell phone too and everything. But when we talk legally, I really can't get by the fact that if we consider the phone of Otto part of his body, I think it's fair. But when we consider a phone part of the body of a teenager who stays on the phone every day and every time, but this is an extension, but is it legally necessary to consider it an extension? Because the law, it's like it has how can I say this in English? Retratar.
Portrait, perhaps? A way
no,
to portray?
Retratar danos.
Repair.
Repair, yeah, it has a repair function. So how can I affect with this kind of function something that isn't an effect but a cause when we talk about socially constructed actions and everything. So the question is, how do we deal with the fact that it's fair for Otto to be legally his cell phone too, but not for other people?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I believe that we need to talk a little bit about the parity principle in order to tackle the question. If Otto pairs himself to his notebook, or actually his cell phone, if the mental experiment would be written nowadays, I believe that if he actually pairs with the phone and the teenager does not pair himself or herself with this phone, this should be a matter of the legal process in order to observe or not. But I believe that the first part of the question should be answered with the parity principle. So if the pairment is correct, then it should be a part of the person's own body. But then we come to a second question, which is a question of basically practical ethics. If we consider in a country like Brazil, in our unequal society, that bodily assault is when you steal, for example, Otto's cell phone, how would we deal with those high rates of imprisonment we talked about? It would be a case of more punishment, a case of increased incarceration. So what we aim to, that's why we talked about a weak debate over the body, but a strong debate over the concept of subject and autonomy and also freedom. Because when we talk about the extended mind being extended to the law field, we talk about reshaping how we deal with the notion of responsibility. We cannot think about an autonomous, unique, individualized subject who acts and steals your phone and therefore goes to jail because of that, because this is a crime that has to do with how our society is actually built.
Well, I might have something to add to the discussion. Law barely is guided by principles such as certainty and safety. So the legal practice is somehow oriented to the idea that we should know what the body is, the boundaries of the body. When we assume this possibility of extended body, and we use the Pareto principle to evaluate such situations, for example, of the assault in the notebook, is one of our concerns. But we can also adopt another kind of perspective, such as an affirmative perspective of recognizing these technologies in the very sense of protection of rights. I remember now, 2 years ago, we had approved a bill of rights of people with disabilities, persons with disabilities, and one of the concerns of our legislator was to protect people with the disabilities, assuring that they could have access to every kind of technological advances that could be used to repair situations. So when we understand that the disability is some kind of compromise in the functions that is not only organic and physical, but also social and psychological, this kind of technologies become like a requisite for good life. So they come to be protected by the law, in the sense that we should afford to all of us the kind of technologies necessary to have a good life. So you can.
When the law punishes someone who steals your property, for example, a cell phone or something like that, aren't they already considering the property as part of you?
I guess I didn't understand actually the question, the first part of it.
If you punish someone that steals your cell phone, for example, why the law punishes these people? Because they are considering that the cell phone is in some sense part of you.
Yes,
the extended part of you in some sense. Don't you think that?
I understood now, thank you. I believe so. In a way, legal systems consider things, for example, a cell phone, as important goods, but they are considered as goods. The punishment is different. So if you steal my cell phone, for example, you answer you go through the...
It's a harm for the property.
Yeah, it's a harm for the property, yes. Not a personhood damage, because there is two different forms of punishment, two types differently. One is more aggressive. In one, you go to jail. You go to jail if you punch someone, and in the other one, you might not go to jail. You do some alternative punishment consequence, such as mini courses or different kinds of punishments, such as
Or
social
pay
work.
a charge.
Or you pay a charge, or you return the cell phone. So the consequence for legal punishment structures is different.
And we can also think about the different of gravity of those harms. They are both different. When you attack someone, his life, his body, or when you attack the property.
Hi. Isn't a cell phone an extension of our bodies, such as a book?
Yes, I believe if we, if we pair it accordingly, and if our brain has the plasticity enough to understand that those outside things are actually not a tool that I use to enhance myself, but actually part of my extended cognition, a book or a cell phone, they should also be considered equally extended part of myself.
Yeah, Celso did his PhD at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and he's now a postdoc at the Federal University of Paraná, isn't it? Pará. Ah, great. Yeah, it's PA. Okay, he is presenting a talk entitled "Do Real Fans Dream of Virtual Idols?"
So, it's everybody listening? Okay. So, yeah, I shall start with a brief disclaimer. I'm just a Platonist who uses Chalmers' work to understand the degrees of reality in Plato. So I want to apologize in advance if what I'm about to say is either trivialities or plain nonsense. Most importantly, the main reason I'm speaking is to gather any suggestions, so I ask you to give them after the talk. So. And I apologize also because I don't use slides, and I'm going to read because if I didn't, I wouldn't have respected 20 minutes, so I'm sorry if it's too boring. Anyway, in his article, The Virtual and the Real, Chalmers argues for a sort of realism about virtual reality. His position has 4 tenets. 1, virtual objects exist. 2, virtual events happen. 3, experiences in virtual reality are non-illusory. 4, experiences in virtual reality may be as valuable as non-virtual ones. These are opposed to virtual fictionalism, the standard philosophical view in which virtual objects are fictional objects, virtual events happen only in fictional worlds, virtual experiences depend on the delusional disposition of being a fictional world, and thus are obviously less valuable than the real ones. To start the discussions, it will be necessary to determine some notions. Chalmers is a structuralist about reality for whom, quote, physical reality can be characterized by its causal structure, the patterns of interaction between physical objects and their effects on our experience, end of quote. Accordingly, concerning our experience, he is a functionalist about mental states. These are not to be identified with its internal constitution, but by their causal function. Both cases allow for a sort of phenomenological veridicalism about the reality, which Chalmers argues should also be valid for virtual reality user, with one caveat. Due to the novelty of the technology, he differentiates between the sophisticated user and the naive one. The sophisticated user is able to properly experience the interactions between virtual objects. In these situations, the experience of a virtual reality would not be illusory or fictional. Virtual reality is defined by 3 characteristics. It must be immersive, interactive, and computer-generated. The virtual worlds in video games are not total virtual realities since they lack the perceptive immersion provided by the virtual reality sets. Yet, nowadays, video gaming remains the place in which we have the more sophisticated navigators of virtual worlds, so that it may be fruitful to see how virtual realism would score in the face of their experience. Chalmers makes a remark about the risk of taking video games as a representative of virtual worlds. As a lot of games, they often involve a level of role-playing, what might give the false impression that virtual worlds are fictional. Thus, the first thing to do is to differentiate between the role-playing in video games and the underlying levels. Take the case of esports. Gamers will play with avatars representing real-world idols. The fictional level appeals to the naive user because it allows them to pretend to be the athlete they wanted to be in reality. The role-playing is clear, but so is the virtual object underlying it. After all, below the appearances, the avatar is an object with so-and-so properties regulating its interaction with the objects in the virtual world. These properties and interactions are the ones a skillful gamer must get the knack of using to navigate the environment. In Chalmers' terms, they acquire the phenomenology of virtuality. At this point, the role-playing either vanishes or becomes superfluous. Interactive environments like virtual worlds in video games are causally efficacious, objects having the so-and-so properties and interactions, while fictional ones are causally barren, an avatar looking like an idol. Skillful gamers acquire the expertise of interacting with this causality. For a functionalist, these conditions could easily lead to a realism about the virtual world. But once the distinction above is made, even fictionalists would have to accept at least a milder version of tenets 1 and 2, in which virtual objects and events have a non-fictional, in the sense of non-causally barren existence as virtual objects and events. This seems to be enough to accept that the experience of a gamer are not illusory, as in tenet number 3. Before we go on, I think it is important to make a difference in the causalities of a virtual and a physical environment. The nomology of interaction in a virtual environment is piecemeal, in the sense that the programmer can introduce whatever rule of interaction in whatever particular case they want without depending on the whole. It is not a net, there is no causality between the causes governing their instantiation. In this sense, we could say that we face a fictional causality at some level. I'm not totally sure about that, but I'm going to use this distinction anyway. Mild or not, 1, 2, and 3, tenets 1, 2, and 3 do not necessarily lead to 4, which states that virtual experience may have the same value of physical ones. Gamers do value virtual worlds much more than the average person, but most of them still value physical reality more. Once again, they qualify as a proper place to study how virtual worlds values work nowadays. We have described the sophisticated gaming as skillful agents navigating a causally efficacious environment. Skillful is a value term referring to being able to act and react to a given environment in its own advantage. Causally efficacious is also a value expression and refers to having a coherent set of interaction rules. Accordingly, the professional e-game championships opt for using games who instantiate coherent virtual environments in a way that opponent gamers will find no loopholes, allowing them to achieve their task in an easier way. That means going outside the phenomenology of virtuality in question. Moreover, such coherent places are the ones who allow for the acquisition of skills by sophisticated users. Those who succeed at these will become the idols within the e-game community. Here we arrive at a criterion for valuing a virtual world. The argument for the coherence criterion would be: interactive environments are navigable by internal causality. Sophisticated navigators get the knack of the causality. More coherent internal causality allows for better acquisition of skillful navigation. Thus, more causally coherent environments have more value for navigators. By this criterion, virtual worlds are more valuable than dreams. Also, as things are now, physical reality has more value than any virtual world. This could be a consequence of piecemeal causality of virtual environments. This is a plausible criterion, but it is hardly enough. After all, if fans do not gather to see avatars navigating perfectly coherent environments. To go further, we'll have to bring them and their third-person perspective into investigation. As it is expected by the fictional virtual distinction, the e-fan is not impressed by the role-playing level. They are not fans of superheroes or avatars doing things that would be incredible given the laws of physics in the physical world. As sophisticated users of virtual worlds themselves, e-fans know by acquaintance the proper difficulties internal to the knowledge causality of a given virtual environment and are impressed by gamers who excel within these. But it is not the whole story. To experience an e-game match, e-fans watch the skillful navigation of these virtual environments, but also the image and voiceover of the physical gamer responsible for the reactions of the avatar. Well, the latter, the experience is incomplete and loses much of its value. In this way, the e-fans have a complex experience combining physical reality and virtual world. Chalmers puts two main points for us to understand mixed and augmented experiences of virtual and physical worlds. One should take into consideration A, if the user can distinguish virtual from physical objects, and B, how these interact. In watching an e-match, the perceptual distinction between the virtual and the physical realms is so marked that one should not even talk about mixing or augmenting. The e-fan has something more like a double-worldly experience. Nevertheless, these distinct realms do interact in a particular way since the gamer's physical actions, pushing buttons, control the avatars in reacting to the phenomenology of virtuality. An example may clarify this hierarchical causal flow. Physical reality water does not wet the avatar. Virtual reality water does not wet the gamer as well. But the gamer can swim with the avatar while the contrary is not feasible. It seems like an umbilical Earth scenario. The mereology between the different worlds in question is significant at many levels. For instance, if virtual reality and physical reality are totally separated, the statement "I can swim" may be true in both cases and refer to the same thing, at least under a role functionalist approach. If virtual reality and physical reality are separated parts of the same whole with no causal connection, "I can swim" may be true in both, but they would mean different things. Let's say VR swim and PR swim. Finally, on our situation, in which a physical reality agent can meaningfully say, "I can VR swim" and "I can PR swim," while the VR agent would meaningfully say, "I can VR swim," and only fictionally say, "I can VR swim." Since virtual worlds depends on physical reality, while the reverse is not true, one could argue that e-fans, by requiring to see the gamer, are just capturing this difference in favor of the more fundamental reality. Nevertheless, this does not seem to be a compelling case concerning value. After all, we may accept that electromagnetic fields are more fundamental than our perceived experience, but we still value a cappuccino more than a bunch of electrons. Accordingly, e-fans do not need to see the digital source, that is the code of the virtual environment, but only the human agent who is the physical source of the actions of the avatar. Whatever it may be, we are not in a quest for the more fundamental reality. Thinking about types of agents might help us to identify the source of the added value in the e-match experience. If an e-fan watches an e-match between avatars on the computer mode, there will be little value. On the other hand, if these avatars are controlled by external AI, this experience would have a proper value. If there is a human agent operating at the digital level, that is, intervening in the code, there is no value as well. Finally, in cases where the gamer finds a loophole in the environment and takes advantage out of it, there will be no value at all. In face of these cases, the value does not seem to be attached to things such as being a human agent, pertaining to physical reality, nor belonging to a more fundamental level. A valid causal source must be an agent able to decide how to act as the gamer, the e-idol, or the AI, whose consequences operate within the virtual level, that is, respecting the knowledge of the environment. No intervention in the code, no loopholes, no computer mode. One could say that these are values related to being a game and not to the difference between virtual and physical, but the above conditions are closely related to the pre-programming factor, which, according to Chalmers, is one of the reasons why we do not value experience in Nozick's experience machine. This might be a game factor of human motivation, according to which we would have hard time attributing value to events under the deterministic perception of the environment. Going back to our case study, if funds need to identify a valid perceptual source of the actions in a virtual environment, but this does not need to be in the physical world, nor at the one at the most fundamental level. Such a perceived origin will be located where the retrospective search for the valid agent stops. At least in principle, it is possible to break this chain at any point. For instance, in the case of the so-called virtual body illusions, the gamer feels the virtual world as the source of their actions. Accordingly, there is a break at we perceiving our will as the source of our actions and any underlying physical laws that could even be deterministic. Thus, our relation to virtual worlds can be the same as our relations to physical reality, what is especially compelling for functionalists. Since physical reality is more fundamental than virtual reality, for virtual reality to have the same value, both would have to be felt as being totally separated worlds, meaning that the actions that occur at each one, including especially those of the agents, should be felt as internal to its own causality. This seems to fit the mild versions of tenets 1 and 2, which takes virtual reality objects and events as virtual and physical reality ones as physical. The added condition is that the causality between virtual world and physical reality will have to be untraceable, at least momentarily. Without a traceable causality, the gamer will attribute the source of the actions to the avatar, although making decisions is not a property of such a virtual object. In this disposition, it is also unlikely that such a user may know to be using a virtual reality. That is to say, this experience becomes illusory. If so, we arrive in a situation in which tenets 3 and 4 of virtual realism may be both true and yet inconsistent with each other. Physical reality and virtual reality may have the same value only if the user enters in an illusory disposition concerning the self-closed causality in virtual reality. On the other hand, one can perfectly take virtual reality and physical reality at face value, that is, knowing the hierarchical causality and interact with them in a non-illusory conscious way, but this will mean that the fundamentally of physical reality will render the value of both types of experience inequitable. To put it in a succinct way, being aware would be necessary not to be illusory, while being unaware would be necessary to have the same value. Just a brief summing up. Based on the skillful gamer, we have seen that virtual reality is non-illusory in the sense that it has a valid functioning internal causality, coherence criterion of value based on internal causality that the gamer is correctly aware of. We have also formulated a coherence criterion of value based on this. Then, after the EFAN experience, we realized that the valid causal chain goes beyond the virtual realm and stops at the gamer in physical reality. Out of that, a causal origin in the non-deterministic agent criterion of value arose. Going one step further, the fact that we are dealing with a perceived causality allows one to entertain the possibility of breaking the chain at different points. Accordingly, it is plausible that a gamer might perceive the causal origins within virtual reality. If so, their experience could have the same value as the ones in physical reality. But the condition brings a difficulty. Once the link to the physical reality is missing, the experience becomes illusory. If this makes sense, in facing tenets 3 and 4 of Chalmers' virtual realism, we would have to decide. Either our experience of virtual reality will be non-illusory, we've been aware of its physical origin, and thus less valuable, or our experience of virtual reality will have the same value as physical reality, but we would have to accept the illusion element of missing the causal link to physical reality. There is no time to enter in such matters here, but as the EFAN actual state exemplifies, I would argue that it's better to adopt a complex position with several realms in a non-illusory way, with its added values, even if it remains inequitable. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who has a question?
Thanks. It's really interesting to think about these video game sports in this in this context, to give out your example of the fans who want to see the virtual, the avatar in action, also the physical body in action. There's a few different things could be going on with that. One is, of course, that our virtual worlds we have right now are relatively incomplete and low quality and so on. So, you know, I wouldn't want to argue that those worlds are remotely close to yet having the value of physical reality. Maybe seeing the physical reality there in conjunction with them gives you somehow a more complete, high-quality sense of the experience. There's also the fact that video game worlds are weirdly Cartesian, that all the physical action that goes on is governed by like the laws of the video game, but then there's all this mental action going on. That doesn't come from within the video game, from within the virtual world at all. That comes from these people in the physical world, you know, like who's moving the controller and so on. All that's coming from outside the virtual world, as if there was a Cartesian soul inhabiting the Cartesian ego, controlling actions in the physical world. So maybe some people want to have access, here the physical world acts as the world that contains the locus of the mind, whereas the virtual world is the world of the body. And we've got this mind-body interaction. So maybe what these e-fans want to get a sense of, not just the body in action, but also the mind that's controlling it. It's as if, you know, to get a full sense of what's going on with Cartesian egos, you want to see, okay, I don't want to just see your body doing this. I want to see what your mind is up to too.
I guess I mainly agree. But do you think if we get in this like in ideal condition of virtual reality, we would have to, our experience would have to become illusory in the sense that the immersion would be so perfect that we would we will lose the causal conjunction to our physical reality, to our minds anyway. So I guess that is the problem. If the virtual reality becomes so perfect that it will have the same value as the physical reality, it seems to be necessary that it becomes illusory, because we would be so immersive in it that we would have to lose the causality to our minds that might be physical or not. So I guess that's the paradox. I do agree with so that they may be not illusory and that they may be as valuable as it, but I guess if we achieve this perfect state in which everything is as valuable as our physical experience, it would be required for us to lose the causal link to our physical bodies or our minds, and this would become an illusory experience.
I guess I'd like to think that virtual worlds could be valuable loci of experience, just like a physical world, fully immersive, even though they're quite different from physical worlds. And even though, for example, you know you're in a virtual world, it would be a bit like traveling between different parts of the physical world. You know, I was in New York, then I was in Australia, then I was in Brazil. These are different. I know which one I'm in, but they're all different, but they're all, you know, extremely valuable and in different ways. So I'm thinking that a virtual world might be like that. You're in a virtual world, you know you're in a virtual world. This somehow, you experience it as a virtual world, so it's not illusory. You don't necessarily experience it as a physical world, but it can still be fully valuable.
Yeah, I guess my problem is that I have a hard time accepting that we are being able to have this third-person perspective would, even if we're able to have this perspective, we would still value them in the same way that we do not. So okay, if we are a brain devet and we don't know there are brain devets, we can have experiences as valuable as the physical ones. But once we get to know that there are brain devets, the value would not be the same.
So you're saying what Cypher said in The Matrix: ignorance is bliss.
No, maybe.
Once you know, you lose value. Once you know you're in the Matrix, it's
yeah, you
less
totally
valuable.
lose. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I have a general question. It has to do with your background. You said you work with metaphysics and antique philosophy. What's the connection that you see between metaphysics in Plato and
Yeah, the connection is exactly the value of different levels of reality and degrees of reality. And, well, the point is that for Plato, there is, let us think, if the point that he doesn't care about the casual connection between words to value them, but he cares about the abstract objects that are necessary to instantiate these virtual words, and or not these virtual words, but any kind of world. So I don't know, and these are like the main realities for him. So if we think about a shelf, and we think about a virtual shelf or a real shelf, for both of them we have to use something like the golden ratio or something like that. And he uses this, so he doesn't care about the causal connection, he doesn't care about the materiality of these different worlds, but since both of them have to build a virtual shelf or to build a natural shelf, you would have to instantiate this golden ratio, and he uses this ideal abstract object as the most valuable reality. So yeah, and the way we think about different degrees and levels of reality about virtual and real worlds, I guess it kind of illuminates this relation that is kind of complex to understand. That's the connection.
Okay, thank you.